Although we're only, 6 weeks into 2021, we've seen plenty of volatility, including stock markets and in particular areas of the market. This is the Cannabis, US Cannabis Stock Market Index. Came into 2021 around the 550 level. And you can see just in the last few days, traded as high as above 1650. So trebled in less than 6 weeks or so. So given the mania that we're seeing around some of these cannabis stocks in February, are there still opportunities out there? Or actually, has the price been pumped up and we're going to see it just dump further from here? In this video, we'll take a look at a couple of cannabis stocks, the index that we're looking at here that you can trade with us, and also an ETF that tracks some of the companies, some of the bigger companies in this sector. But I thought just to set the scene, first of all, we'll take a look at the cannabis index. We've got data going back here, back to about May of last year, and you can see fairly flat for much of it. Came into 2021 really strong, breaking out through these old highs from the last 6 months of last year. Then it really has had a rocket put under it in February. We've seen fairly massive inflows into cannabis stocks just in the first week of February compared to where it was in January. We saw the price pushed as high as 1661, the 10th of February, and it's lost not far off 60% in a couple of days. Massively volatile market, very difficult to trade, but are there still opportunities out there? So I'll talk now about some of these different companies and the ETF, and we'll come back and look at things in a bit more detail. Hello, I'm David Jones from Capital.com, and I thought we'd do something different this time around. I thought we would dip our toes into listed marijuana stocks, and because we've seen a lot of volatility, as you saw there, from the index in recent weeks. So let's take a look at this in a bit more detail, see where the opportunities might be. So we'll have a look at a couple of stocks and also an ETF, an exchange traded fund designed to track the performance of the industry as a whole. So as usual in this video, I'll talk a bit about the markets we're going to look at, then we'll jump back onto the platform, look at things in more detail and see where the opportunities are. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, if you could click on subscribe, it does help support the channel. It means we can continue pushing out, hopefully, lots of interesting videos throughout the week. Right, let's get into things. Let's take a look at the first of these stocks. Let me just talk about the backdrop first of all. So in the US, the legalized marijuana industry in 2019 was worth around $13 billion, but it's forecast to reach a value of about $30 billion by 2025. Of course, it used to be illegal, but as of the end of 2020, marijuana was legal in 35 states in the US for medical use and legal in 15 of those states for recreational use. And one of the reasons why people expect the industry to grow further is the change in government in the US. With the Democrats in power, many people are expecting perhaps a more liberal approach, even more liberal, going forward and seeing further legalization across the US. But it's a bit of an odd setup when it comes to the individual stocks. For example, Canadian cannabis companies are allowed to list on US exchanges because it is legal in Canada. But because at a federal level, so at a national level, it's still illegal in the US. US companies can't list usually on US exchanges. So we see lots of US companies listing on Canadian exchanges. So there's quite a bit of back and forth going on here. We've seen plenty of volatility over recent weeks. Again, that the finger is being pointed at Reddit and the subforum Wall Street Bets. Of course, we had all that excitement with GameStop stock back in January and into February. And at the moment, it does appear that it's attracting a lot of interest amongst the community there. And we've seen a sharp run up and, as usual, as we're getting used to now, quite a sharp fall off in some of these legalized cannabis stocks. And you can see this just from the figures. According to Vanda Research, in the first week of February, retail investors put something like $400 million into cannabis stocks, which was more than double the amount invested throughout all of January. So it did attract some hot retail money, and we saw the price run up. And since then, we've seen some of these stocks come back down quite heavily, but not to where they were before the mania really started. Anyway, let's take a look at the first of these companies and see if there's an opportunity. So the first of these is a name familiar perhaps to many people who look at the sector, and it's Tilray. It's a global leader in cannabis research, cultivation, production, and distribution. We're not going to have to wait too long to find out how it's been doing recently. Its next results are due out on the 17th of February. So at the time of recording, that's tomorrow. It's the fourth quarter results and also, of course, the results for the previous year as a whole. So they will make an interesting read. Last time round, we had a $2.3 million loss. It would be interesting to see how they've reduced that. If they have they turned it round into a profit? Plenty of volatility for the stock in recent weeks. Just last week, it had increased more than threefold for February. So again, we'd seen a massive move, although the stock has dropped back by about 50% from that recent high. So let's put some color on all of this. Let's jump on the chart, take a look at Tilray in a bit more detail. So here's Tilray, and if we go back to March last year, we saw Tilray dropped to about $2.50, and I think looking at this sort of period, it does put the volatility this year in perspective. Came into this year trading around $8, and then last week touched $66 a share before crashing back down. I think it's really hard to trade markets when they're moving like this because it's difficult to practice sensible risk management, all of that sort of stuff. But let's take a look on the hourly charts and see if there are still short-term opportunities. Let's flip it over to an hourly for 2021 so far. I mean, we do have a trend line in place that's been there for much of this year, and it did a good job right into February. And then, of course, the market or the share price really took off from then. So I suppose if you wanted to buy into the trend for this year, we're edging back to those sort of levels now. So I think one potential idea on Tilray is to be a buyer, is to perhaps watch it in the days ahead. At the time of recording, it was still pretty weak at the end of last week, ending up around, $29. You can see it fairly clearly there on the chart. We do have this old support coming in. It's not that old. It's only from the 4th of February, coming in just below 24. So I think for Tilray, this 20 to 24 area is going to be an interesting one. As we have seen perhaps some of the mania die down, I'll be watching it over the next few days. Do we see some stability coming in this 2024 area? I think if we did get a bit of strength after some of the madder moves in February, there's an argument to be a buyer in line with this trend. So whilst you may feel you've missed a lot of the excitement, and that is true, I think perhaps we'd have to wait some time for it to go back up to those highs from earlier in February. I still think looking at the trend this year, there could still be an opportunity in Tilray in the days ahead. The next one we're going to look at is Canopy Growth. They are the first, or they were the first first cannabis company in North America to be publicly listed back in 2014. And to sum up what they do, I can't do any better than Reuters, who describe them as the world's largest pot producing company. They've got a variety of different products, whether it's supplying the plant itself, or drinks, edibles, and vapes as well. We've recently had results from this one. They expect to be profitable. They're not yet, but they say the second half of 2022 is when the company will start turning a profit. Let's take a look at things in a bit more detail. So here's our chart of Canopy Growth. I've gone back a bit longer on this, back to this is second half of 2018. We can see the shares peaked back then, up around the $72 mark up there. Had another go once again in April, May 2019. And it's quite interesting that again, that's where we've seen it run out of steam in the latest surge. But perhaps what we want to pick up on here is this recovery that started from October 2020. Let's just zoom in on that. So here's the move really, or the trend I should say, from October 2020. I've put an RSI on here, 10-day RSI. When we see, I think, mad moves like this, like I say, for some of the other markets we cover, I think the RSI has perhaps questionable use. You know, when the market was moving strongly higher, late Jan into Feb, the RSI was overbought. So if you were following that, you might have got out a little bit too early. But saying all that, again, I think as with Tilray, we've got a good trend here. in Canopy growth. That trend line is coming in around $37 a share. We've got good support, I think, from back here. Jan the 8th lows around $37. At the time of recording, it had closed the previous day, or the end of last week, at $51.20. Still looks a bit weak, so perhaps there is scope for a bit more of a sell-off. But again, I think, like as with Tilray, we have had this burst of volatility. If we see a bit more weakness from here, we're returning back to a more short to medium term trend. So again, I think for me, it's one I'd be interested in continuing to watch this week, see if we see some stability come in, and then think about being a buyer, possible places for stops, depending on when we see this weakness end. The lows, the Jan 19 lows around $41. After that, like I say, these lows around 37, January the 8th, and the trend line currently coming in around 37 as well. So I think if we saw it perhaps under a bit more pressure to the low 40s, it looks interesting again, but that trend from October is still up. Just a question of how far this correction is going to go from here, but down in the sort of mid to low 40s, it certainly looks interesting. Of course, if you don't want to invest in individual companies, exchange traded funds, ETFs, have always been and continues to be a really popular way of gaining exposure to an area of the market. The ETFMG Alternative Harvest ETF, not the snappiest of names, it's an ETF that tracks the global cannabis industry. Top holdings at the end of 2020 by the ETF include Tilray and Canopy Growth, and also GW Pharma and Aurora Cannabis. Not surprisingly, given the interest and the moves in these stocks this year, it's having a great 2021. So far, it's up about 70% for the year to date. There's been plenty of volatility again on the top of that. So let's take a look at the ETF and see if there's an opportunity here. Here's the ETFMG Alternative Harvest ETF, and you can see how it has clearly, carved out the fortunes, the ups and downs of the cannabis industry over recent years. Traded as high as 45 in 2018, September 2018. Then a couple of years later, September 2020, it was as low as $10. Again, we have seen this recovery since then. So let's zoom in on what's been going on since October, November. As with all these other stocks that we've looked at today, we had this burst of volatility, this surge higher in February, a bit of a reality perhaps coming back in since then. But once again, we've got a good trend in this ETF. Off the late October lows, good support at the moment coming in on the trend line around $17. Good support from late Jan around $18.25. So once again, if we did drift a bit lower, perhaps closer towards $20, and we saw some strength come in, I think there's another opportunity there. So it's the same theme for all of these different markets. This burst of volatility in late January, early February, returning more back to normality, but it hasn't changed the overall recent trend over the last 3 months. So I still think there are opportunities out there. That's it for this update on some of the cannabis stocks and an ETF. Plenty of volatility in this area. But for now, from me, David Jones and Capital.com, we'll leave things there. Good luck with your trading. For more trading videos just like this, please subscribe to our channel.